I'll call this meeting to order. First of all, I will lead the land acknowledgement. On Thursday, October the 17th, 2024, we acknowledge that the sacred land on which Smith Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We are mindful to the broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all other relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. I'm John Wanless, Chairman of the Planning Advisory Committee. I'll take attendance of members. Jay?
Present.
Steve Robinson?
Present.
Yvonne Robert?
Here.
Mary Remick?
Present.
Jacqueline?
Present.
Before we start, item number 2 on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion? Moved by Yvonne, seconded by Steve. All in favor? Carried. Adoption of minutes. Planning Advisory Committee meeting, September 12th, 2024. Can I have a motion? Moved by Mary, second by Jay. All in favor? Carried. Disclosure of monetary interest. We'll now open the public meeting portion of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting to consider. Just a minute, I'm going to switch this around. We're going to meet for 25 Union Street first. Okay, now I'll open the public meeting portion of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting to consider one zoning bylaw application and one application for permission, which will be considered similar to a minor variance application. This meeting is your opportunity to provide any feedback on these applications, and the Planning Advisory Committee welcomes any questions and comments you may have. We encourage you to do so at this public meeting, as the Planning Act rules suggest that the public's ability to voice objections later in the process may be limited if a written or oral comment is not submitted. Town Council is in the approval authority of the applications for permissions and makes a recommendation to Council on amendments to the zoning bylaw. The committee will review the applications and any comments or concerns from the public to inform their decision or recommendation to Council for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Okay, where do we flip to? Where do I flip it?
Go to here. Because we're doing 25 Union first.
No, we're doing 25 Union.
Okay. So that's
Which,
okay.
Okay.
And so now.
So what's that one there? 24, 11, 25.
No, that's 25 Union. So now you can go to this part.
Okay, all right. And I'll pass the meeting over to Richard Grant, Planner 1, to report a notification and summary of the minor variance application for MV 2402-25 Union Street. Following this presentation, we will open the floor to comments from the public. The applicants or their agent in attendance will also have an opportunity to address any concerns brought to the floor by the public. Richard?
Okay, so this is the permission to expand application for MV 2405 for 25 Union Street. The applicant is Ion Engineering and Survey, represented by Tomlin Grovac, and the owner is Tasha Lee Gilfin and Roger William Cosino. Here we can see the subject property highlighted in black, and the property is in the corridor commercial zone. This is a request from section 4.23.7, permitted extension of non-conforming uses. Seeks permission to expand illegally non-conforming residential uses on the subject property. The proposed is the 2-story ARU and an 18-meter shed. The existing 10.7 meter shed will be removed as part of this, as part of their proposal. Here we can see the site sketch. It's probably harder to see from where you are. But in the rear, we have the proposed shed that's closer to the rear lot line, and on the other side, closer to the, I guess the north-south would be the proposed shed. That would be the proposed addition that is right behind the existing 2-story house. The application for this proposed development is in the corridor commercial zone, and it is considered a legally non-conforming residential use with the house constructed in 1910 and the shed in 1988. The lot forms part of the original 13884 Smith Falls survey. If approved, the area will function as a second residential unit and the shed as an additional storage. Here we can see these images of the home. So first we see the home standing here, and the farthest back to the lot will be where the shed will be located, and immediately behind the home is where the proposed area will be. We have different views of the home just to give a bit of perspective. And here we have on one side the residential property that has another adjacent residential property, and the other side we see the country diner. So this is more giving a bit of context of where the house is located in the corridor commercial zone. For this application, the Department of Public Works was consulted, as well as the chief building official. There is no public feedback received as part of this application. The Department of Public Works and Utilities does not object to this application. They require stormwater management brief and a grading and drainage plan. And they recommend the incorporation of low-impact development techniques at the time of building permit approval. The chief building official does not object to this application and has no further comments. Section 452 of the Planning Act outlines the powers of the Committee of Adjustment to permit the enlargement or extension of legally non-conforming buildings or structures. The assessment today would be coming from case law, and the two questions for the assessment will be, is the application desirable for the appropriate development of the lands in question? And question number 2, whether the application will result in undue adverse impacts on the surrounding properties and neighborhood. For question number 1, in staff's opinion, the application is desirable for the appropriate development of the lands in question. It is not considered a major detraction from the existing corridor commercial zone in character or function. In staff's opinion, there aren't any adjacent land uses that would be affected by the proposed intensification. The proposed area and shed are configured in a logical manner that would be similarly seen in other residential lots. The proposed addition supports existing residential use, which enhances the existing residential function. It's a form of gentle intensification, and it's modest and compact in development. Question number 2. It is in staff's opinion that the application will have no adverse impacts on the surrounding properties and neighborhood. The corridor commercial zone will not shrink in size or be reduced in its prescribed function as a commercial industrial area. Besides the existing adjacent property, there are limited opportunities to expand in legally non-conforming residential uses, meaning that we won't necessarily see a lot of examples of this type of development in the corridor commercial zone. Everything's on a case-by-case basis, so everything will have an opportunity to be assessed by this committee every time there's a request. Thirdly, it's not an expansion of the subject lot through this application, it is just a form of residential intensification. Lastly, the incorporation of LED techniques reduces the potential for increased stormwater runoff as a result of a greater lot coverage. In summary, planning staff believe the proposal presents a reasonable construction that does not negatively impact neighbors or vehicular traffic near the location and can be demonstrated to be an example of good planning with respect to desirability and adverse impacts on the subject property and existing neighborhood. As such, staff recommend that the committee approve the permission to expand application as proposed.
Thanks, Richard. We will follow up with the opportunity for the public to speak to questions. All comments and questions need to be addressed through the chair. Please be advised that the verbal comments from part of the public record. As such, we ask that you please state your name, address before providing verbal comment. Any members of the public who wish to speak to this application are asked to please approach the podium one at a time. Is there anyone here? We got no comments?
Not from public. Tomlin is the agent.
Okay.
Oh, I don't actually have any comments other than being the agent here.
She's the agent.
Yeah, well, do you want to step forward and speak?
Oh, I don't really have any other comments.
Oh,
I feel Richard covered most of it.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll move any comments from the committee. Steve?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support staff recommendation. I drove by there a couple of different times, and I can't see how that would be a bad addition to the existing building. And if it's going to be an additional residence, then that's one less residence that we need for the rest of the time. So build them one at a time. So anyway, I'm in favor of it.
Mary?
I actually just require a couple clarifications, but like Stephen, I generally support this. I apologize. Could you go back to where you can actually see the side into the yard? I think it's just a poor angle.
Sure.
Because I believe the report's calling it a shed, but is what's being demolished that portion at the rear that appears to be attached to the building?
Yes, so it was identified on the site sketch as a shed.
It operates like a shed, so there's no entrance into the building from that way. Is that
Not
correct?
to my knowledge, yes.
Perfect. Secondly, just the setback for the new proposed parking space. Is it within the required front yard? I believe that the existing dwelling seems to be 3.6 meters back from the front yard.
Yeah, so the existing dwelling is 3.6. Now, mind you, this is a long-standing use, so I'm not sure if at the time they were using the appropriate setbacks that we use now.
Right.
And secondly, I would consider this to be the interior side yard. So like there's a front yard where the house is situated. I don't know if I'm having enough pictures to show you.
Okay.
So there's a front yard there.
So I guess I would just flag that for you because my understanding of the bylaw would be that it was in the required front yard. So I'm more just flagging that. But like Stephen, I'm in support of the application. I don't see how this is a bad addition to the camp.
Okay.
Yeah, I am too, and I was over as well. And if you look at the picture with the white car in the driveway, and then there's parking here. So when I was over, there was a car parked on the side, like facing over towards Country Diner, perpendicular. And it seemed to me the back shed, which you're calling a shed, there was another structure.
It's a gazebo, I think.
That's a gazebo around the pool, I believe. But behind that, I think there was something else there as well. So I assume that's going to be torn down. But if you look at it also, if you look at the neighbor's house, it seems that there's multiple units in that particular house as well. So I'm in full support of the staff recommendation. And as Stephen said, it's just intensification, which we certainly want and need. So thanks to the owners and the proponents for going ahead and providing us with some more units.
Because it shows the side and it juts in. That's true. So it's behind, that's what Jason.
I'll now ask if there are any questions or comments from the committee members. After the discussion on the application, thank you. The committee is asked with deciding on this application for permission. If the committee is ready to do so, I will now entertain a motion to approve, not approve, or any other decision. Yvonne,
I move to approve.
second by Jay. All in favor? Carried.
Okay, thank you. Second, yeah. I'm gonna go down.
I'll now pass the meeting over to Carl Grinke, Manager in Development Services, to report a notification and summary of zoning bylaw housekeeping amendments ZA-24-02. Following this presentation, we will open the floor to comments from the public. The applicants or their agent in attendance will also have an opportunity to address any concerns brought to the floor by the public. Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, committee. So the zoning amendment application that we're looking at this evening is a little different than most of the applications that we consider that are submitted by an applicant for a particular property. In this case, this is we're looking at a municipally initiated zoning amendment application that really attempts to address anomalies, correct challenges in implementation that we've received. So we call it in the planning world, we call these housekeeping amendments, and they're fairly common. Every municipality does them. We adopt a bylaw. In this case, we adopted a brand new bylaw in 2022 that did a lot of things. But as staff work with the bylaw on a day-to-day basis, we identify little, I don't know if you say glitches, but little challenges in implementation. And rather than bringing those forward one at a time and creating a public meeting every month for, typically these are amassed into a larger quantity and brought forward as sort of an omnibus set of changes to a variety of sections. So in this case, we're not looking at rezoning any particular properties. We're not proposing any mapping changes. It's just text amendments, mostly to general provisions that apply across the board. So, housekeeping amendments, by definition, are intended to be minor in scope. We're not changing the strategic intent of what the bylaw is attempting to accomplish, or we're changing the broad parameters of a particular zone. I think if we were looking at sort of a more strategic or significant scale zoning change, then we'd be looking at certainly a different stage of public engagement to obtain feedback. So again, these changes are intended to be more sort of minor in nature. So this committee considered back in March, we considered a series of amendments, and unfortunately, as is often when we're looking at sort of getting into the housekeeping realm, as we picked up the bylaw and as a few other things were found, we've added to it. So in September, staff brought forward to a committee of the whole the housekeeping changes that were looked at in March by this committee, as well as a handful of others. So this is what's being brought forward. Council directed staff to initiate the housekeeping zoning amendment process and undertake the Planning Act process set forward. So like every other zoning public meeting, the purpose of the public meeting is to involve the community in considering the changes to the land use rules that are in effect for either for a property or for the town as a whole. So any feedback that we received is certainly helpful in framing our recommendation and as the staff recommendation and ultimately the committee's recommendation to council, who makes the final say. So following this public meeting, staff will bring forward a report and a recommendation to council. There isn't a recommendation brought forward here other than simply that the committee provides a recommendation to council on the application. So the Planning Act gives us a couple of different tools for notification for a zoning amendment change, either general or specific. So this was for a specific property, we would post a notice on site and mail to property owners within 120 meters. In this case, being a general amendment, we've done notification a little bit differently and followed the general path set forward in the Planning Act, and that is posting in the newspaper as well as on our website. And the brief notice in the paper referenced more details on the website. So we're working on the notification processes as a whole there. So I'll just quickly jump through the changes. The staff report that's accompanying this presentation details the exact wording. So the first proposed change to our violations and penalties section relating to enforcement. This was recommended by our lawyer, actually, as a best practice for enforcement, and really intends to clarify the references to the specific pieces of legislation we're working with, and sort of allow us to seek a broader penalty if that's how it proceeds. The next change is to keeping of animals. Really what this section proposes to do is delegate the regulation of the keeping of animals from the zoning bylaw to the animal control bylaw. So right now we have two bylaws. The animal control bylaw doesn't allow the keeping of animals other than household pets, except as part of a specific use like a kennel or an animal hospital or something like that. So the animal control bylaw it's the more appropriate way to manage, and certainly as you're all aware, council's considering a request to accommodate backyard chickens subject to certain restrictions. And the zoning bylaw really isn't the right place to work on that, because it prescribes details that are a lot more specific that then would typically be addressed in zoning. It's more of an activity rather than a land use, and a municipal act bylaw is a lot easier to enforce than a zoning bylaw as well. So the animal control bylaw we're proposing through this change to allow that as the mechanism to regulate animals if council so chooses to. So if council adopts the recommended change to the keeping of animals section, in and of itself, that doesn't change anything. Council would still, chickens or other livestock still aren't allowed because the animal control bylaw doesn't allow it. But at least this would, if council decides to amend the animal control bylaw later on, then that would be the way in which that's regulated.
Can I ask a question as you're going along?
Certainly, Councillor.
So on that one that you're talking about, I think that basically that was, because this was discussed at council, and basically that was a request of council to take this out of here, right? And so I wasn't particularly thrilled with that because zoning, in my mind, is part of, I think typically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, typically in other municipalities, there is provisions in zoning that, talk about livestock, not only chickens, but I think we pieced that out. That's just a comment. I know that this was requested by council. It will be looked at through the animal control bylaw. So it's coming out of zoning. I'm just voicing my opinion that I think it should be in zoning, but enough said.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly to clarify that. And it's typically most municipalities that regulate livestock certainly as sort of a land use, like it fundamentally as part of an agricultural land use. In this case, looking at livestock as in a couple of chickens on somebody's backyard if they wanted to eat, that comes down to that sort of the technical discussion on what's an activity, what's a land use, and certainly staff and council will work together and propose a policy approach that's certainly, and council will follow that. Ultimately give us direction on how to proceed there.
Yeah. I mean, I'll debate this at the council table through the chair, but what if someone wants to have some goats or of pigs and stuff like that. So I'll bring that up at council. I think it opens the door, other than a hobby chicken, somebody with a couple of chickens. But anyway, just a comment.
Oh, certainly a fair point, and I think that conversation will be held. I think the intent of this change here is just to delegate it all to one bylaw rather than two bylaws. So we're not intending on, if council does change the rules at some point later, we change one bylaw rather than potentially changing one and leaving sort of a policy gap in another. So we will certainly have those conversations as we move forward and find the right approach for the town of Smith Falls. Objects stored in yards. This is a very different section. We're proposing a couple of changes as it relates to recreational vehicles. So the three changes that are being proposed here all do somewhat separate things. Firstly, clarifies that no recreational vehicle can be stored on a vacant lot. That's fairly common in zoning in small urban municipalities. It's implied in the zoning policy that we have today in reference to all of the yards, but we feel it's important to make it clear so there isn't any ambiguity. The second point continues to allow for temporary parking of RVs in private yards. However, based on a request from our fire chief recommending that they be directed to that long-term storage for RVs occurs in the rear yard rather than interior side yards to allow for a safer and easier access if need be. So this relates to the long-term storage of RVs. Short-term storage, if you're looking to tinker with an RV in a driveway for up to 72 hours, we're not proposing to change that. The current rules around living in RVs, those are difficult to measure and enforce. And certainly a couple of years ago, council paused the enforcement of those rules based on through the COVID pandemic when we were hearing from residents who wished to reside on the same property but live separately from the family to allow social distancing, and those requests were coming in from folks who were involved in the healthcare industry. So that doesn't and that was in effect while we had the state of emergency. So the intent of the rest of the bylaw is that RVs are not where recreational vehicles are not where people should be living, and 30 days it's difficult to enforce. So we're proposing to remove the 30 days and simply align with the intent of the rest of the section. That being said, the zoning bylaw still allows for temporary habitation in situations if you have a building permit in effect. The zoning bylaw already allows for RVs to be lived in while the house is under construction on the main lot. You can stay there. So that's not proposed to change. So number of dwellings on a lot. So you'll see in the report, there's a fair bit of text added, but the overall impact of that addition is actually fairly minor. It's a bit of an administrative process. So the grouped dwellings in the current bylaw, the definition and general provisions for group dwellings were removed. So group dwellings, just to clarify, is not the same as a group home. A group completely unrelated to group home. A group dwelling is defined as a circumstance in which there's multiple dwelling houses on a single lot. It could be two single houses on a lot. It could be two townhomes on a lot. It could be two apartment buildings on a lot. But the bylaw removed the general provisions for group dwellings. Well, the bylaw removed the general provisions and the definition. However, there were some references to group dwellings throughout the bylaw. So just to clarify the intent, this change isn't intended to really provide a strategic shift on how we regulate density, but rather correct an anomaly and highlight the situations which are fairly common sense in terms of allowing multiple dwellings on a larger lot. Barrier-free parking spaces, that is another proposed change that we're looking at here. The current zoning bylaw defines accessible parking spaces and sets out dimension requirements and a variety of other requirements. What it doesn't do is tell us how many barrier-free parking spaces are required. So the zoning bylaw sets out parking space requirements for a variety of uses, but there aren't requirements in the zoning bylaw for barrier-free. So as a practice, what staff have been doing is advising, when we get those inquiries, we advise people to follow the AODA requirements. That's built out in legislation and specified the number of parking spaces needed for accessibility provisions. So we're proposing to formalize that link. What some municipalities do is create a special table in the zoning bylaw that outline accessible parking space requirements. The drawback to that approach, I think, is if the AODA changes, then we're left with a policy glitch. So I think just tagging it to that legislation is a more appropriate way to go and ultimately follows our operational processes. Driveway width for street townhouses. So our zoning bylaw currently allows a driveway to be at most 50% of the property width or 3 meters. So normally that works, but on some townhouse lots, the townhouses are a minimum of 5.5 meters wide. So technically they cannot achieve a complying driveway. So we're proposing to allow that, basically create a provision there that allows a legal driveway. So that is a housekeeping change that essentially makes it, that clarifies an inconsistency and anomaly in the bylaw. Similar to watercourse setbacks, it's our zoning bylaw, like just about every zoning bylaw that relates to land near water, provides a watercourse setback. And there's a reason for that, and that's to protect the integrity of the shoreline and prohibit too many hardened surfaces that have an impact on the natural heritage feature, fish habitat, create erosion, and so on. In our zoning bylaw, we discussed, as we were crafting the zoning bylaw, we discussed an approach of the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority where we would still allow vertical additions to a building. So if there's a building very close to the water, they wish to build a couple of extra stories, that's still construction within that 30-meter water body setback, but we're not creating any new hardened surfaces near the water. So in that case, it made sense to create that exemption from the rule. So that it doesn't appear that was transcribed exactly as intended in the zoning bylaw. So that's what we're correcting through, or what we're proposing to correct through this process. Interior side yard setbacks in the R2 zone, we're proposing to allow for, and just to clarify, this relates to semi-detached dwellings. So a semi-detached is a side-by-side, not an up and down. So a side-by-side where there's two entrances to the street. Usually, semi-detached dwellings, the building that's semi-detached, it can exist as a single building on a lot, or it can exist as a single building, but it's divided into two lots. So there's the lot line right down the middle wall. So in the R3 zone, that's permitted. There's a 0 lot line setback, similar to a townhouse in that case. That wasn't transcribed in the R2 zone, so we're proposing to align the R2 and the R3 zoning as it relates to semi-detached, and basically allow that arrangement where somebody can either construct or sever a semi-detached dwelling along the shared lot line wall without having to obtain a minor variance from this committee. The final proposed change it's much more specific than a lot of the others, and that's automobile care. So one of the things we did in the current zone with the new zoning bylaw is amalgamated and simplified some of the definitions we have. So if there are definitions that were very similar to each other, we kind of merged them just to reduce the amount make it easier to use and read. In this case, the automobile care was removed as an individual use and folded into the automobile service station use. But the automobile service station use includes the automobile care provisions plus a variety of others. So we're proposing a few text changes to different sections of the zoning bylaw since the reference to automobile care wasn't removed from all of the individual zoning categories, we're proposing to essentially complete that process here And that won't actually change the permitted use on anybody's property, but essentially remove some superfluous language in the bylaw. So as you can see, there's a variety of changes to a variety of sections in the bylaw here. PAC will have the opportunity to form a recommendation that will be given to council. These changes, of course, it's not an all or nothing as a package. They can be considered and approved or not approved individually. They typically don't relate to each other. They all sort of stand on their own. But when we're with any zoning change, when we're considering a change to the zoning bylaw, we evaluate that on a number of criteria. Compliance with the official plan, of course, that's our guiding policy document that outlines our vision for growth and development in the town. Compliance with the new provincial planning statement, informed by department and agency feedback and public feedback if there is any. So following this public meeting, we'll certainly welcome a recommendation from the Planning Advisory Committee to take forward to council, and council will have the opportunity to decide whether to proceed with the housekeeping changes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Carl. We'll follow with an opportunity for the public to speak under the question. All comments, questions need to be addressed through the chair. Please be advised that verbal comments from part of the public record. As such, we ask that you please state your name, address before providing verbal comment. Any members of the public who wish to speak to the application are asked to please approach the podium one at a time. We have no public here, so. I'll now ask for any comments from committee members. Jay?
Yeah, I'm going to support this. It's going to go through council. I did have one other question, and sorry for interrupting you on the animal stuff, but on the water course setbacks, would there be any squawking from Parks Canada along their river, their heritage river? They're 30 meters, are they as well?
They have a commenting authority within the 30 meters, but they're not an approval authority. It's unlikely in our experience in dealing with Parks Canada. Certainly their interests are similar to RVCA's in terms of ensuring the protection of shoreline. And we haven't received feedback from Parks Canada on this. Certainly we can ask more specific and targeted questions just to make sure we're not going to see a surprise later on. Zoning buildings would still be subject to the zoning bylaw height limits that are already in place there anyway. So that would be, and Parks Canada did provide comment on that when we developed the zoning standards, the height restrictions for waterfront properties in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, and through the chair, just one other one on the recreation vehicles. So that's a zoning matter as opposed to a bylaw matter. I know of RVs that have been parked on streets all summer, and that's a bylaw matter, correct?
Correct. If this relates to RVs on private property.
Private property. Okay, so that is a zoning matter. Okay, thank you.
Steve?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Getting back to the water setback road, the reason that I'm kind of thinking this is we're in the process of getting the old water treatment plant taken down. Would this 30-meter setback affect a proposed redevelopment of that site?
That's an interesting question, Mr. Chair, and typically, and I think that's where we're sort of going to have to stage the process here. So the Planning Act prescribes legal non-complying and legal non-conforming rights. So if there's a structure that's very close to the water and it has to come down for whatever reason, so long as it's rebuilt within a certain period of time, then there'd be a legal non-complying right that's associated with it. And there's a whole bunch of legal variables when it comes to legal non-conforming, legal non-complying rights, and certainly there's many lawyers who've done very well for themselves in litigating this matter. But I think, to answer your question at a very high level, there would be consideration there. Certainly, we'd be documenting what's already there. I think it's an existing hardened surface. Certainly, the legal non-complying rights would typically apply to the exact same building envelope that was there already, and we don't know if a future development is going to be bigger or different in some way. Certainly, there'd be a planning process that evaluates that. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, it does, to the best of your ability. That's great, thank you.
Anyone else? Mary? You going?
I do, Mr. Chair. John?
John?
I have.
Yeah, okay.
One's actually a couple of them are comments. I'll start with those first. So your rationale regarding objects stored in the front yard notes a 30-day consecutive limit on habitation would be difficult to enforce and administer. I agree with that. I think section 4.24G presents the same challenges regarding no recreational vehicle permitted for a period of more than 72 hours in any one calendar month in the front or exterior side. So I wanted to flag that for you. What was the other one? Question. This should be a relatively easy one. The number of dwellings on a lot, you noted that group dwellings is referenced throughout the bylaw. And I just wonder if those references will be tweaked to reflect the changes. Oh, he might still be stuck on 424G.
Yeah. So
Yep.
to address your comment with respect to 4G, I think the distinction that I saw there is the G relating to the 72 yards. I think that's measurable as a presence or absence. It's either there or it's not there. If the RV is stored somewhere else in the yard, it's not always evident whether it's being lived in or if somebody's moved away for a certain period of time and then come back. It's a little bit harder to measure there in terms of whether it's actually being lived in as opposed to
Because that could be subjective.
It's
Where this one's a little more objective. It's there, it's not.
yeah, and I've seen municipalities, rather than say 72 hours, they just say it can only be stored in the yard over the summer months or something like that clearly implies that that's not its home, but it can sit there for a little while. And council has some variability on how they want to, or if they want to go down that realm of regulating their location.
Here, it doesn't usually become a problem for someone in 72 hours anyways.
Nope.
Number of dwellings on a lot. Group dwellings, you said were referenced in other sections of the bylaw. Is there any changes that need to be necessitated to address that reference, such as a definition? Because like you said, it was taken out in preparation of the bylaw. Is group dwellings specifically referenced and needs to be tweaked to reference these changes?
I will verify that before reporting back to council to make sure there aren't any stray languages that haven't been removed.
And then just one last question. Steve mentioned demoing the building down at the water treatment plant. So once demolished, how long does the bylaw allow legal non-conforming rights to stand before they're no longer applicable?
So I'm verifying the section. Those time periods are one of those things that have been litigated. Zoning bylaws have traditionally given you a year or 2 years to rebuild something that's set in stone. That has been removed by virtue of case law, and then it's become a matter of demonstrating an intent to rebuild. So,
Okay.
sorry?
I said, okay. I remembered the case law fact that you dealt the other piece moot, but.
So the exact language of our bylaw, I'm taking I'm taking a quick peek. My recollection is that there's no timing in there. It just states that once it's removed, and then it becomes more of a case by case matter of implementing the case law. But that shouldn't be noted for the minutes until I find the section.
It used to be interesting. But I knew it was moved as case law. But I don't know, I don't remember the old. And that's what makes me nervous with your question.
You got a year.
I'm sorry. I was behind the desk before. They called me the question queen. At least they're decent.
Talk about watercourse setbacks.
The removal of non-complying structures. I may, for the sake of this meeting, I may have to look at that.
That's right.
Have to look at that separately and report back.
I think it's more of a consideration for council.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, there we go.
I was
Yeah.
curious.
Mr. Chair, that may come up when we see a proposal from a proponent.
Yeah.
Yes, we may put that parameter on them as some sort of time.
Yeah.
Because there's an IO or a memorandum of understanding as it stands now. And if that's to be extended, then we'll probably say, 2 years or something.
It's difficult to 100% with certainty state that legal non-complying rights would or would not be in place. There's a number of variables. It was clean when there was a time limit in zoning.
Case law. Damn.
Okay, so here I'm seeing actually that there is this commenced within 2 years. Oh, nope, I think that relates, never mind, that's I think a different section here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take a.
Yeah, no,
we'll have
that's
to take a
fine.
closer
To be
look.
fair, I do think that that's more something that council's going to want to know and consider at their level, because today we're just developing a recommendation. I just think that given the question that was posed about the old water treatment plant is probably an important consideration.
So what's the concern? Sorry. You can turn here.
We were just talking about water body setback, that provision that's changing to allow for extensions that don't change the horizontal setback. And then we were talking about the building that needs to be demolished along the waterfront and how that would affect it. And I'm curious how long those legal non-conforming rights will stand and how we can preserve that.
Once the building is removed.
Once the building's removed, yes.
Right.
Because if we're demolishing it this year, then that potentially could put a clock on rebuilding, right?
So,
Interesting.
I've got another one.
So a non-conforming use shall be considered to be terminated once the use ceases and the property is used for a permitted use. So I think case law has interpreted that to give a little bit more leeway in terms of demonstrating the intent to restore a non-conforming, non-complying use. But that's certainly something that we would have to work with. Ultimately, council will, once we have a development proposal and once we've documented what's there at the water treatment plant, then I think we'll have a little bit more clarity. But I think in this case, the section is intended to give a little bit more. The proposed amendment to the bylaw here is intended to give a little bit more flexibility for vertical additions that don't widen the amount of impermeable surface on a property.
So if you don't mind through the chair, just following up to make sure that I understand, that provision is essentially that as long as the property remains vacant and no change of use occurs that's permitted within the zone, then the legal non-conforming setback could still be kept, could be retained by the developer.
Yeah, I think my understanding of case law is that so long as there's an intent to restore or I guess rehabilitate or bring back the use, certainly if there's a fire and the place burns down, then there is a right for them to rebuild if it's legal non-conforming or non-complying.
Just in terms of what you read from the bylaw there, is that speaking to the use or the building itself? Sorry.
In this case, it refers to the use. So we'll certainly go down that journey as the water treatment plant property, I guess, evolves into its future configuration. Does that help at all?
I'm done.
Anyone else? No? Thank you, Carl. The committee is tasked in making a decision on this zoning bylaw amendment application. If the committee is ready to do so, I will now entertain a motion to approve, not approve, or any other decision.
I approve.
Moved by Stephen, second by Yvonne. All in favor?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Carl.
Yes, the minutes the resolution is noted, but the minutes will reflect this excellent conversation and the feedback. It's provided a little bit of homework for me to sort of clarify and potentially tweak here and there before this goes to council. So I certainly appreciate that feedback on this.
Thank you for attending and participating in the planning process of application ZA-24-02 and MV-24-05. Anyone requiring further notice regarding this application is asked to leave their full name and mailing or email address on the sign-in sheet located at the table by the door. Appeal rights as prescribed by the Planning Act will be outlined on the recommendation to council and the notice of decision. If you have any questions on this application or process, I invite you to get in touch with our Planner 1 or Planning Clerk. This concludes the public portion of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. We will now move to the next item on our agenda. Priority issues. We don't have any. Project updates. Yvonne.
I'd like to give the Planning Advisory Committee just an update on the updating of the official plan and transportation plan. On October 10th, the township, I apologize, the town and its consultants held a World Cafe at the youth arena, upstairs in the youth arena. And they divided the whole 2 hours into very specific areas: transportation, housing needs, sustainability, community places and spaces, and downtown revitalization. It was well attended. Each table, they had a time limit to discuss the issues that they felt were relevant to each of these areas. And I hope that the consultants have walked away with a lot of ideas. There was a lot of sticky notes flying around. There was a lot of notes being taken by the consultants, and the time flew by. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Next item, project updates. We don't have any. Next meeting, Planning Advisory Committee meeting Thursday, November 14th, 2024. Can I have a motion for adjournment? Steve Robinson.